Hey there, Ed McCormack here, founder of the crypto education platform, DChained. Before we start this video, I'm obligated to ask, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, pound that like button. We appreciate all the support we continue to get from viewers like yourself in growing this channel. So with that being said, what we're going to start off with is a request that I get every single week, which is, what is a project that is somewhat off the radar by most investors, which provides access to a project that has real commercial value and ultimately could start to gain a lot of steam in the coming months. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a project that solves a multi-billion-dollar problem facing both institutional investors like big banks to retail investors like you and I. If you're asking yourself, what project could we be talking about? Well, look no further than Qredo. We're going to talk all about it right now. So before we jump into Qredo, let's talk about the underlying issue that it solves. And the underlying issue is liquidity. Whether you're talking about a centralized exchange like Coinbase, Gemini, Binance, which if you've traded on them, you know that they offer a limited number of tokens that you could buy and trade, but ultimately you have very little slippage. You're not paying high gas fees, etc. Versus the other end of the spectrum, where you go on a Uniswap, Pancake Swap, Sushi Swap. They really need to come up with better names, by the way, where you have access to any and all tokens that have really ever been produced, but the liquidity on them is somewhat low because they operate on what's called liquidity pools, meaning investors put up their assets in return to receive interest for those assets. And those liquidity pools can be somewhat constrained depending on the overall demand and trading volume of the assets that are being traded. And this is where you have instances like slippage come in. Slippage is basically the change in price between when something is originally bought versus sold. Because a low volume trade can ultimately require a higher price in order to bring in enough assets, to bring in enough counterparty to facilitate your buying or selling. This is where a lot of differentiation occurs when it comes to trade. And that's why you often sometimes receive a lot less than what you initially wanted to trade for in a Uniswap swap or something that you would do on 1inch. Now, with that being said, the solve to both of these issues is staring us right in the face. And that solve are the institutional investors. Institutional investors who have come into the space gradually over the last 2-3 years are a group that have really put their toe in the water and really focused their attention on centralized exchanges, really in a select few tokens like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, Cardano, etc. And the reason that they're a solve is that all you have to do is look at the overall equity world. And it's easy to see that the vast majority of all the trading volume are happening with these big banks. We're talking billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that are traded between these big banks and financed from their reserves. And if you bring them into the overall crypto and DeFi space, it solves a lot of the liquidity problems. Now, it's not so simple because if you think about what's holding them back, it comes down to counterparty risk, meaning the fear that either on one side, they're going to face some serious issues when it comes to slippage, because for them to place an order, it would be very hard to avoid an instance of them signaling to the rest of the market that they're making a trade, at which point they might fall victim to what's called front running, because you have all of these automated bots that exist in the decentralized world, which could ultimately identify they're about to make a trade. They will then come in, make the purchase ahead of them by paying a higher gas fee or by working closely with a miner who puts the transaction on the blockchain. And then subsequently, after they have it, sell it right back to the bank, making a nice little margin in the process. And this is something that, is the idea of front running, which occurs, is something that happens in the shadows in the equity world, but it's fairly limited because the overall equity world works on a model called an order book. And it's a big concern because of compliance issues and because of the overall deprecation of their rates and the returns that they're getting for their investors. So it's something that's very concerning for them. On top of the fact that if they just stay in the centralized exchange world, they're missing out on all of those tokens that are gaining appreciation up until the stage of adulthood, which is when they finally get listed on those centralized exchanges. So for them, they recognize, hey, I want to be able to invest in these high value projects, and I want to get access to them when they might be worth 100 million, not when they're worth 5 billion. So they can capitalize on all of that appreciation. Not to mention all of the benefits of the high yield stablecoins that exist in the decentralized world. So you might ask, well, how is Qredo a solve to this issue? And this is where it comes down to really what they provide versus the solutions that are existing today. Today, most of these institutions are using what's called the Custodian. Custodian is basically a financial firm that holds the assets on behalf of these institutions, insures them, and gives them the ability to then trade through their prime brokerage. If a bank like Goldman Sachs wanted to use BitGo, they would pass money to BitGo, fiat. BitGo would then turn it into USD coin, and then Goldman would then be able to trade through BitGo's prime brokerage. Now, the challenge is that the prime brokerage, for the most part, has a fairly limited scope. And this is not just BitGo, this is most custodians, in terms of being able to trade across Ethereum-based tokens. As you know, whether you're talking Solana, Avalanche, Terra, Binance Smart Chain, there's a lot of other blockchains out there. There's a lot of other value that exists out there in the overall ecosystem. So they're fairly limited in what they could do. Or they can go down the route of using a Fireblocks, which gives you a hot wallet solution, but actually doesn't give you, any assurance around having that umbrella insurance on top of your overall assets that you're investing. This is where Qredo comes in. Qredo actually doesn't use a similar model to a Custodian, which is primarily, a cold wallet solution. If Goldman wanted to make a trade through many of these custodians, it could take up to a day for that money to get shifted over to them from their cold wallet vaults, and they are vaults for the most part. But if they wanted to use Qredo, it's a different model. They don't have to go to a single entity. They get to really use a technology that is inherent to blockchain, which is called multi-party computation. And I say it's inherent because rather than relying on an entity to get permission to trade or to hold your assets for security purposes, you trust the network. And that's really what blockchain was all about. You're moving trust from an entity like a bank or custodian to blockchain. And that's what, multi-party computation, that's what Qredo does. So if I wanted to make a trade, what I would do is holding a Qredo wallet, which is either integrated directly or actually Qredo itself, it would then send that request to several different servers that Qredo hosts around the world. Each of those servers has a secret piece of information that it itself only uses. It's a private key. And that secret piece of information is then used to output an answer to a very complex math algorithm that at the end of the day, across all of their servers, each of which has secret information, should kick out the same number as its output. And that's where Qredo will then verify the authenticity and the accuracy of that information. If everything checks out, it then will play this buffer between the institution and the decentralized exchange. The transaction is made, Qredo sends those assets back to the blockchain itself. So what happens here is that the institution has an extra layer of security that is exponentially more advanced than what exists today if you're using just a hot wallet, which for most people is an extension on Chrome. All you need is someone to hack Chrome, and then they get into your extension. This is a layer several degrees more advanced than that. And it's also a solution that gives them the flexibility to access all of those offerings that exist on decentralized exchanges. So we're talking about a product here that can solve a multi-billion-dollar issue that institutions are facing. One of the biggest buying groups that really we haven't even seen the true impact of coming into the market with. And if you're thinking, well, why is this such a secret? Well, it's not. Some of the biggest names in blockchain, going from Coinbase themselves all the way to Kronos, which is one of the biggest high-frequency trading firms in all of blockchain, and also founder of one of our favorite projects, Woo Network, they're backing Qredo. So we're talking about a firm, a project that the smartest money in all of blockchain is standing behind. And that's why when you're thinking about what are some of the next projects that I should put on my radar, I would highly suggest that you consider Qredo. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, again, subscribe to this channel, pound that like button. And until next time, happy and safe investing. I'll speak with you soon.